Welcome. You have found your way here, and that is enough. Whatever the day carried, its weight, its noise, its unfinished edges, you can set it down now. You do not need to carry it into this night. Let your body settle into whatever is holding you. Feel the places where tension still hides, perhaps in your jaw, your shoulders, the space between your brows, and let those places go, gently, the way a held breath finally releases on its own. You are safe. You are still. You are exactly where you need to be. Breathe in slowly. Let the air fill you completely. And breathe out, long and slow, releasing everything you no longer need. Again. Breathe in. Feel yourself settle a little deeper. Breathe out. Let your eyes grow heavy. One more time. Breathe in. And breathe out. Good. Now, imagine that you are stepping away from the modern world. Not fleeing it, simply stepping, the way you might step from a bright room into a quieter one. The noise fades. The urgency dissolves. Time slows, the way it does in very old places, where the stones themselves have learned the art of patience. You are going somewhere ancient. Somewhere beautiful. A city that has been breathing, quite literally breathing, for thousands of years, its lungs made of alleyways, its heartbeat the rhythm of fountains and the soft call of prayer drifting over rooftops at the edges of each new hour. You are going to Damascus. Old Damascus. The real Damascus, not the one of headlines or history books, but the one that exists in the memory of those who have walked its cobblestone lanes at dawn, who have run their fingertips along walls worn smooth by centuries, who have stood very still in a quiet courtyard and understood, without words, what it means for a place to be alive. Somewhere in the oldest quarter of this ancient city, behind a door painted the deep blue of a summer sky, there is a small home. Inside that home, there is a courtyard open to the heavens. Inside that courtyard, a fountain speaks in a language made entirely of water. And inside that fountain's quiet music, two women are waking up. Their names are Amira and Layla. A mother and her daughter. And they are about to begin their day in the most unhurried, most gentle, most soothing way imaginable. Let us follow them. Let us rest inside their story. Let us breathe the air they breathe. Chapter 1. The Waking Courtyard. Dawn in Old Damascus does not arrive all at once. It comes slowly, almost shyly, the sky above the minarets shifting from black to indigo, then a thread of violet along the rooftops, then rose, then amber, then gold. By the time the first full light touches the ancient stone and spills down through the narrow lanes, the birds have already been singing for an hour, and the air carries a coolness that belongs only to this part of the morning, a coolness the city holds with great care for as long as it can. In a small home tucked deep inside the labyrinth of cobblestone alleys, Amira was already awake. She was 55 years old, and she had been waking at this hour for as long as she could remember, not from habit alone, but from something deeper. A pull. A knowing. The sense that this particular hour, the one that stood at the edge of the night and the beginning of day, belonged to her in a way that no other hour quite did. She moved through the darkness of the house the way water moves through familiar channels, without haste, without collision, finding her way by memory and by feel. She knew every stone of this floor, every curve of every corridor. She had walked them in the dark for 30 years and knew their voices, the soft groan of the wooden step near the kitchen, the faint sigh the air made when she passed beneath the arch that led from the inner hallway to the courtyard. She stepped into the courtyard and stopped, the way she always stopped, because no matter how many times she entered this space, it still asked something of her. A pause. An acknowledgement. A moment of being fully present before the day began to ask anything of her in return. It was a modest courtyard. Not large, not grand, but beautiful in the way that modest things so often are, beautiful because every part of it had earned its place, had been chosen or placed or grown there with intention and care. The stone underfoot was pale and worn, polished by decades of foot and rain and dry season and rain again, smooth in the way that only time can make things smooth. The walls rose on all four sides, draped with climbing jasmine, its dark greenery still and sleeping in the pre-dawn dark, the vines old enough now that they had wound themselves into the stone itself and seemed to belong there as thoroughly as the mortar. In the center stood the fountain. It was carved from pale marble, octagonal, the basin wide and shallow, the pillar at its center simple and unadorned. From the top of that pillar, water emerged in a thin and constant stream, falling into the basin with a sound that Amira could only describe as the sound of something that had been going on for so long that silence would have been the stranger. Drip. 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 Not a dramatic sound. Not exactly musical. But a sound that seemed to slow time slightly, to press gently on the edges of the day and hold them from rushing forward before they were ready. Amira crossed to the low stone bench beneath the jasmine wall and sat down deliberately, the way someone sits who knows this moment is worth taking slowly. The jasmine above her was not yet fully open, the blossoms needed warmth to release their full depth, but even in the early coolness there was something in the air near that wall, almost a sweetness, a promise of sweetness, like a word forming in the throat before it reaches the tongue. She breathed it in and closed her eyes. There is a particular kind of stillness that belongs to courtyards in old cities in the very early morning, a stillness that is not empty but full, not silent but soft, the accumulated quiet of walls that have absorbed centuries of ordinary life. This courtyard had that kind of stillness. Amira had lived inside it long enough that she no longer thought about it. She simply inhabited it, the way one inhabits a language that has become native. The star she had noticed on her way in disappeared. The sky began, very slowly, to become something other than night. And then there were footsteps, soft, familiar, coming from the inner hallway. Layla. She was 30, Amira's daughter, and she moved through the world with a quality her mother had observed since she was small and still could not quite name, a quality of attention, of being genuinely present wherever she happened to be. She entered the courtyard with a pause at the threshold, a brief moment of receiving the space before moving into it, and Amira felt, as she often felt in these morning moments, a quiet gratitude so familiar it had become something closer to the atmosphere of her life itself. Layla was wearing a loose dress of pale blue cotton. Her dark hair was unbound, falling past her shoulders. Her mother's eyes, that was what people always said. Large, dark, with a quality of watchfulness that was not guarded but open, the eyes of someone who notices things and finds them interesting. She crossed the courtyard without speaking. This was their way, in the first minutes of the morning. The courtyard was too quiet for words, the hour too new. They shared the silence the way they might share a cup of tea, with ease, without ceremony, simply passing it between them. Layla sat beside her mother on the low bench. Their shoulders touched, lightly, and they both looked upward at the rectangle of sky that the four walls held, still mostly dark, but shifting now, the darkness becoming something more like a very deep blue. The fountain dripped. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city was beginning to stir. A donkey's hoofbeats several streets away, slow and steady. The creak of a shutter being opened. And then, drifting over the rooftops with the first warm breath of the morning air, the call to prayer. It began with a single held note, long and clear and somehow both ancient and entirely present, the muezzin's voice emerging from one minaret, then taken up by another, then another, until the whole city was threaded through with the sound, something that rose and fell and rang against stone and spilled back down into the streets and courtyards and open windows of this city that had been waking to this sound for more than 1,000 years. They sat together in the sound, inside it, until the last note faded and the city went quiet again, a different quiet, a post-prayer quiet that felt rinsed, the air cleaner for having held that voice. Then Layla said, simply, "I'll make the tea." And Amira said, "Yes." Layla returned with a small brass tray, the kind with an engraved rim, worn smooth in places by years of use. On the tray, 2 small glass cups, tulip-shaped and slightly smoky, set in silver-toned holders. A small pot from which steam rose in a thin and fragrant column. The tea was mint, fresh mint, not dried, cut this morning from the pot on the kitchen windowsill, and the smell of it, sharp and clean and vivid, cut pleasantly through the jasmine-sweetened air. Layla set the tray on the low table beside the bench, a small table inlaid with mother-of-pearl and a pattern of stars and leaves, another old thing, another thing that had earned its place, and poured for her mother first. The sound of the tea being poured, a thin, continuous, musical sound, tiny and bright. Amira received the cup in both hands. The warmth of it moved through her palms, into her fingers. She did not drink immediately. She simply held it, and breathed the steam. They sat together in the brightening morning, mother and daughter, and they drank their tea without words. They had been having this conversation, this wordless, tea-warm, jasmine-scented conversation, for years, since Layla had come to live here and stepped into this house and this life with the ease of someone returning to a place they had always known. The tea was very good. The jasmine was opening now as the air warmed. One moment the air held only the promise she had sensed earlier, and then, without her being able to say exactly when, the promise had become the thing itself, a scent, gentle but clear, sweet without being heavy, the kind of smell that made you think, for no reason that could be explained, that everything was going to be all right. Amira breathed it in. And again. There was, she thought, not for the first time, something almost miraculous about the jasmine. That a plant so slender, so easy to overlook when it wasn't in bloom, could produce this. This exact smell. This smell that seemed not merely pleasant but somehow necessary, as if the morning were incomplete without it, as if this tiny blossom clinging to an old stone wall had a role to play in the world as real and as important as the fountain or the light or the sky. She was setting down her cup when Layla made the small sound that precedes a word. "I should sweep the front step," Layla said. Amira nodded. The front step was swept every morning, a way of beginning the day with a small, complete act, something started and finished before the hour was fully open. She heard the front door open. Then Layla's footsteps stopped. A pause, longer than a pause for a broom. A pause with something in it. Then Layla's voice, low and soft, carrying the quality one uses when not wanting to disturb something fragile. Amira. Come and look. Amira rose and came to the front of the house. The door was open. Layla stood at the threshold, the broom held loosely in one hand, completely forgotten. She was looking down. And there, curled against the base of the doorstep, pressed into the slight declivity where the old stone had worn and settled over the decades, was a kitten. It was very small. Small in a way that made the world around it seem to have been made at the wrong scale, too large, too loud, too full of hard edges. It was a very warm shade of ginger, the color of apricots in high summer, plump and sun-warmed and smelling of sweetness. Its eyes were open, and they were looking upward. They were not frightened eyes. They were simply open. Present. Taking in what was there with a directness that was, Amira thought, oddly peaceful. It made a sound, small, unsteady, part mew, part something that had not quite decided what it was yet, and then the courtyard and the doorway were very still again. Layla and Amira looked at each other. Not a look that required words. The quick and certain language of shared recognition. We know what this is. We know what it asks. We know what we are going to do. Amira crouched down and held out her hand, palm upward, close enough to offer but not so close as to press. The kitten looked at her hand. Then at her face. Then, with the deliberateness of a creature that had given the matter full consideration, it lowered its chin and pressed the top of its head against her palm. She felt the warmth of it. The impossibly soft fur. And beneath the fur, the tiny delicate skull, and beneath that, a heartbeat, fast, as small hearts always are, a quick bright flicker that seemed to belong to a different scale of time altogether. She lifted the kitten. It settled into her hands the way the very small settle into things that are warm and larger than themselves, with a completeness of trust that is not earned but simply given. In the kitchen, she warmed a small measure of goat's milk, just enough to take the edge of cold off it, just enough to make it the temperature of something living, and poured it into a small hand-painted ceramic dish, white with a thin border of blue, from a potter she had bought from for 20 years. She placed the kitten beside the dish. For a moment the kitten sat very still and looked at the milk. Then it lowered its head and began to drink. The sound of it, a tiny, rhythmic lapping, barely audible, a sound so small it might have been the sound of something imagined. But it was real, and it was happening, and both Amira and Layla stood quietly and watched it happen, the way you watch small living things do living things, with a pleasure that is not about the thing itself, exactly, but about the fact of it. That something so small exists and is here and is drinking from a dish on a kitchen floor and making a sound no louder than a thought. We need to find him something soft to sleep on, Layla said. The old wool cloth, Amira said. The brown one, in the chest in the storeroom. The one from your grandmother's winter coat. Layla went to find it and returned with the cloth, dense and soft, washed many times to an extraordinary softness, carrying still the faint smell of cedar from the chest it had lived in. She folded it into a small nest near the warmth of the kitchen wall, in a corner where the morning light would reach it when the sun climbed high enough. She lifted the kitten, who had finished the milk and was sitting beside the dish with an expression of great seriousness on its small face, and placed it on the wall. It turned once, twice, the ancient circular ritual of the cat, then lowered itself and folded its paws beneath its chest and closed its eyes. It was asleep almost immediately. The sound of its breathing, barely there. A soft, steady rhythm, tiny and complete. Amira and Layla stood looking at it for a moment in the companionable way of people who have just done something that was simple but right. "What shall we call him?" Layla asked. Amira considered. She looked at the warm ginger fur, the color of sunlit fruit, of summer abundance, of sweetness made visible. "Mishmish," she said. Layla smiled. It was exactly right. The Arabic word for apricot. Small, sweet, sun-warmed. A name for a creature the color of summer mornings. The fountain in the courtyard went on dripping. The jasmine went on opening. The city went on waking, slowly, in the way that very old cities wake, not with alarm or urgency, but with the unhurried confidence of something that has done this 10,000 times before and trusts entirely that it will do it 10,000 times again. Inside the house with the blue-painted door, the morning had made its first offer of the day, a small warm life, a little wool, a saucer of milk, a name. It had been accepted. And the house felt, as it always felt at this hour, but more so this morning, complete. Chapter 2. The Alchemist's Workshop. The morning settled into itself by the time they finished their tea and began the transition from the quieter life of the courtyard into the working life of the house. This transition was never abrupt. It happened gradually, one moment blending into the next so gently that you could not have said, looking back, exactly when one thing had ended and another had begun. Mishmish, still sleeping on the folded wool, did not stir. The workshop occupied the rear of the ground floor, a room that had once been a formal receiving space but had given way, over decades, to purpose. Shelves had been built. Surfaces added. The large back window had been widened to let in more light, and the room had become, in its quiet and particular way, something more alive than a receiving room had ever managed to be. It was, Amira had always felt, the true center of the house. She stepped through the doorway first, and the smell of the workshop received her. This was what newcomers noticed first, before the shelves, before the glass and copper and light, the smell. Not a single smell. A layering, a conversation, an accumulation of many years of work conducted in this space, rose always at the center, the way a melody persists beneath variations. Sandalwood, warm and deep. Amber, sweet and slightly resinous. The ghost of cedar. And beneath all of it, threading through everything like a bass note felt more than heard, the particular smell of the copper alembic, metallic, clean, ancient. Along the shelves lining three sides of the room were the vials. Hundreds of them, most no larger than a finger, stoppered with tiny corks or ground glass, each labeled in Amira's small and precise handwriting, the handwriting of someone who had trained herself to write small because space on a label is limited and information is not. They lined the shelves from floor to ceiling, and when the morning light came through the back window and struck them, as it did now, the sun having climbed high enough to clear the roofline of the neighboring house, the effect was something that Amira never quite managed to take for granted, despite 30 years of its being there every morning. The light moved through the glass and became color. Amber from the rose absolute, deep and warm and concentrated as garnets. Emerald from the cedarwood and the pressed rosemary extract. Pale gold of jojoba and almond. The near colorless shimmer of orange blossom and neroli. And where these colors overlapped onto the same surface, cast by neighboring vials at the same angle of light, they combined into new colors that had no names, or had many names depending on who was looking and in what spirit. The walls glowed with it. Layla had once said it was like standing inside a jewel. Amira had thought that was close, though what the workshop resembled more truly was standing inside a very old word, a word that had been carrying meaning for centuries and had acquired, in that time, more layers of meaning than any single pair of eyes could take in at once. Layla came in behind her carrying the morning's raw materials, dried Damascus roses, lavender, a sealed jar of beeswax, a cloth bag of agarwood chips, and set the basket on the work table without being asked. This was how they worked, side by side, in a rhythm so organic it resembled less a division of labor than a single organism conducting its own processes. Amira went to the copper alembic. It stood on its own small stone platform in the corner, its age legible in the surface of the copper, that soft, irregular patina of something gently heated and cooled many thousands of times. She lit the small fire beneath it using olive wood, laying the pieces carefully so the heat would be steady and low and even, because it was steadiness above all that the distillation required. Not intensity. Not speed. Steadiness. The fire caught. She watched it for a moment, attending to it the way you attend to something entrusted with important work, then turned to the flask and began to prepare the rose petals. She measured them with her hands, pressing her palms briefly around the gathered petals before releasing them into the flask, feeling the dry papery texture, the slight give when pressed, the way the concentrated smell rose sharply from the disturbed heap. Then cold water from the deep cistern, poured slowly over the petals, the liquid darkening as it covered them, the petals floating, rising, rearranging themselves as if returning to some half-remembered form. She fitted the alembic's head and sat. The distillation was not primarily an active process but a patient one. The alchemist's role, once the fire was lit and the flask was sealed, was largely to be present. To watch. To listen. To respond if something required response, but mostly to be there, attending, in the way you attend to something doing its own work and only asking that you not abandon it. Across the room, Layla worked at the mortar. She had measured a careful portion of dried rose petals into the wide stone bowl and taken the pestle. The first blow was always decisive, not hard, not crushing, just the right pressure to begin the breaking. Then the rhythm, steady, circular, the pestle moving in long arcs, the dried petals yielding gradually, the crackling of their breaking becoming softer as they reduced from whole pieces to fragments to powder. Thump. 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 The sound of the pestle and the mortar was one of the fundamental sounds of this room, as fundamental as the drip of the fountain in the courtyard, or the hiss of the alembic, or the clink of the glass stoppers on their vials. The smell rose as the petals were broken, quickly, assertively, filling the space with something that hovered at the edge of overwhelming and then settled back into something the nose could hold and understand. The smell of the rose at its most direct. Not refined. Simply itself, released by the simple action of one stone against another. Amira breathed it from across the room and closed her eyes for a moment, receiving it the way you receive a piece of music, without filtering, without analysis, simply open. The Damascus rose. There was nothing else quite like it. She had worked with roses from Turkey, Bulgaria, Morocco, the highlands of Iran, all beautiful, all possessed of their own distinct character. But the Damascus rose had a depth the others did not, a complexity, as if all the centuries of cultivation in this particular soil under this particular sky had added something that could not be replicated elsewhere. She opened her eyes. The first drop was falling from the spout. It hung at the tip for a moment, suspended, perfectly rounded, catching the amber light of the room, and then it fell into the small glass receiver below. A single clear drop, barely there, almost nothing. But not nothing. This was the thing about distillation that had never stopped astonishing her, that from petals and water and fire and time, something arrived that was none of those things and somehow made of all of them, concentrated into this single translucent drop that held within it the entire argument of the rose. She was smiling. By mid-morning, the receiver held enough oil to begin the blending. Layla had set out the base oils, sweet almond, pale and barely scented, with a texture like very thin silk, jojoba, stable and loyal, which would not go rancid, would not change, would hold whatever was placed in it with great fidelity, along with measured drops of sandalwood and diluted jasmine absolute, and the faintest trace of oud applied to the vessel's interior on the tip of a glass rod. They stood on either side of the table and looked at the components arranged between them. This moment, before the blending began, when all the elements were present but not yet combined, when the possibilities were still open, was one Amira had come to value and protect. A moment of contemplation, of assessment, of letting the mind and nose move through what was there and understand it before committing to the act of bringing it together. Because blending, once begun, could not be undone. Once two scents were combined, they were combined. You could add, you could dilute, you could attempt to modify, but you could not separate what had become one thing back into its parts. The combination was a commitment. This was why you thought first. She picked up the glass rod and stirred the base oils gently, the jojoba and the almond moving together easily, two neutralities content to become a single neutrality. Then, slowly and with great attention, she added the first drop of rose distillate. She watched it fall from the pipette into the base oil, spread as it landed, opening across the surface in a slow-motion ring that widened and thinned and gradually disappeared into the medium around it. She stirred again, long and unhurried. And the smell changed. The base oils had been pleasant, neutral, mild, a kind of benign absence. The rose distillate alone smelled intensely and specifically of itself. But when they came together, something occurred that was neither the sum nor the average but a third thing entirely, a presence that was warmly neutral at its foundation and specifically, softly, undeniably rose at its surface, a scent that moved in and out of the nose differently than either component had moved alone. Layla leaned in and breathed. "Yes," she said quietly. The sandalwood came next, a half drop at a time, because sandalwood at full concentration was assertive, and what was wanted was its presence as a foundation, not as a declaration. She added it and stirred and smelled. Added again. Stirred and smelled. The sandalwood working with the rose the way a low note works with a melody, supporting it, giving it something to rest upon, making it somehow more fully itself by providing the contrast of depth. The jasmine absolute came next, even less of it, a trace, adding its slightly more insistent sweetness, a sweetness that pressed more fully against the nose, as if jasmine knew its own beauty in a way that the rose was too dignified to acknowledge. And the oud, already there from the touch of the glass rod earlier, working from the background with the quiet authority of something that does not need to announce itself to be felt. Amira stirred the blend one final time, long, slow, circular, and brought the vessel to her face and breathed. It was good. More than good. It was one of those blends that found its arrangement easily, that seemed to have wanted to exist in this form, as if the components had been waiting for this particular combination and were now simply being what they had been trying to be. She passed it to Layla without a word. Layla breathed it in. Held the smell, not sniffing again, just letting what was already there develop, the way you let a piece of music develop without skipping ahead, and then slowly exhaled. It's the rose that makes you feel it first, she said. And then you realize the sandalwood was there the whole time. Amira smiled. That is what sandalwood does. It is patient. Layla smiled back, and they stood for a moment on opposite sides of the table with the morning light coming through the back window and the vials glowing on the shelves around them and the alembic hissing its quiet and steady hiss in the corner and the blend between them, new and right and smelling of roses and patience. Then they began the filling. The small vials received the blend a drop at a time from the fine-tipped pipette that Layla held, precise and unhurried, because filling was the final stage, and the final stage carried the accumulated care of all the stages before it, and to be careless at the end was to betray the beginning. Clink. The stopper placed. Clink. Another vial sealed. Clink. Each one a small completion, a small closure. The work of the morning contained and preserved and readied for whatever hand would next receive it, 23 small sealed prayers of peace, arranged in order, their glass catching the light from the window and adding their amber glow to the larger amber glow of the room. Amira placed her hand on Layla's shoulder, briefly. A touch. The kind that says, "Good work." The kind that says, "I am glad you are here." The kind that says many things that a touch says more truly than a word. Layla covered her mother's hand with her own, briefly, and then let it go. The alembic continued its work in the corner, unhurried. And in the kitchen, in his corner, on his grandmother's wool, Mishmish slept on, his small ginger chest rising and falling in the steady, untroubled rhythm of something that has found its place in the world and is content to remain in it. Chapter 3. The Generosity of the Souq. By midday, Mishmish had woken. He woke gradually, in a way that very young cats wake, one layer of sleep peeling back at a time until he was sitting upright on the folded wool with his eyes fully open and his small ginger ears swiveling in different directions, cataloging the sounds of the house with the methodical attention of someone conducting an official survey. He had found the water dish Layla placed for him while he slept. He had investigated the corner of the room nearest his nest, found a dried sprig of rosemary that had fallen from the kitchen shelf, and batted it several inches across the floor before sitting down to attend to the cleaning of one ear. He was, in other words, beginning to make himself at home. Amira found him in this state of domestic exploration when she came to prepare the market basket. She stood in the doorway and watched him work the rosemary sprig across the floor with one deliberate paw, and felt the particular pleasure, familiar to anyone who has ever received a small creature into their house, of seeing a new life settling into a space and finding it sufficient. The basket was a large, flat-bottomed thing of woven palm fiber, its handles worn smooth from years of being carried. Into it she placed the morning's vials nestled in cloth, several tins of balm, each made from beeswax and oils and dried herbs according to recipes that had been in the household's practice for 3 generations, and sachets of dried botanicals for keeping stored linens sweet. She packed it slowly, thinking about each item as she placed it, who it was likely suited for, what need it might answer. The market was not an abstraction, not a quantity of transactions, but a collection of specific people with specific lives. Layla appeared, already dressed for the market in deep blue, her hair pinned, a rose-pink shawl across her shoulders. She carried her own smaller basket on one arm and looked at Mishmish, who was now sitting in the center of the kitchen floor with the regal composure of someone who had always lived here. "Can he come?" she asked. Amira considered. The Souq was not a quiet place, and Mishmish was not yet a large animal. But he had shown, in his few hours of existence in this house, a temperament that was more philosophical than alarmed. "He can come," she said. "But you are responsible for him." Layla gathered Mishmish from the floor and placed him in the lined basket. He looked over the rim for a moment at the kitchen around him, making his assessment, then turned twice and settled himself with his chin on the edge and his amber eyes steady on whatever lay ahead. They left through the heavy wooden door and stepped into the alley. It was narrow, the alley, narrow enough that 2 people could pass each other only by turning slightly sideways. The stone was old and uneven, worn into a landscape of gentle hills and hollows you learned to navigate by memory as much as by sight. The walls rose above them, pale stone broken by wooden doors and shuttered windows and, at intervals, a flowering plant that had found a crack in the mortar and made of it an opportunity. Above the walls, between them, the sky, always framed in the old city, never the whole sky but a portion of it, a rectangle of blue that changed shape as they walked. Amira had always found something instructive in this. The same sky above the old city as above the open desert, but here received in pieces, in carefully bounded gifts. And somehow this made each piece more visible, more attended to. A deep, confident blue today. Not a cloud. They walked through several alleys, through a small square where a fig tree had grown up through the stone and reached its branches over the surrounding walls and cast a moving shade, past a bakery from which warm bread smells came in simple waves that stopped you in spite of yourself, past a water fountain set into a wall where a small boy was conducting an experiment involving a stick in the fountain stream, and then the alley widened and the sounds changed, gaining the particular quality of accumulated human presence, and they walked beneath the great iron gate of the Souq al-Hamidiyya and were inside. The Souq was covered, a long, vaulted ceiling of corrugated metal and stone arches, punctuated by large round holes through which light fell in broad columns, each one full of drifting dust and the occasional ambitious bird. The light inside took on a quality it did not have outside, more golden, more directed, as if the architecture had been designed not merely to shelter the commerce below but to give it the dignity of being properly lit. The sound was everything at once. The calls of sellers, voices layering without quite canceling each other out, creating a density that was not unpleasant, the way a piece of music can be dense without being noise. Hundreds of feet on stone, like a slow continuous river. The occasional percussion of something being moved or set down, a crate, a cart, a bolt of cloth being unrolled with a sound like a flag in a light wind. And over all of this, the accumulated smells of the Souq, open spice sacks, the warm bread smell from bakery stalls near the entrance, the complex animal smell of the leather quarter deeper in, the sweetness of dried fruits in their wooden trays, and at the particular turning where Amira and Layla always paused to get their bearings, the sharp and resinous smell of the oud merchant stall, which established itself as a landmark as surely as any signpost. Mishmish, peering over the basket's rim, was conducting a thorough audit of the Souq. His ears swiveled, forward, sideways, back, building a picture of the space from its noises. His nose worked rapidly. He did not look alarmed. He looked extremely interested. "He likes it," Layla said. "He likes everything," Amira said. "He is young enough to find it all remarkable." At their section of the long, low counter, Amira arranged the morning's offerings, vials at an angle so the light showed their color, tins of balm with labels facing outward, sachets folded neatly. Mishmish settled chin on paws in the basket between them and observed the passing market with the patient authority of a very small sphinx. A woman with a child on her hip came to look at the bombs. She picked up a tin and turned it in her hand, smelling the faint scent through the sealed lid. Her child reached for it with absolute certainty, and the woman redirected the small grasping hand with the practiced ease of someone who has done this 10,000 times. "For yourself, or for someone else?" Amira asked. "For my mother. Her hands. She works in the kitchen all day and they are very dry." Amira reached beneath the counter and produced a different tin, smaller, its label marked in a different color. "This one. Beeswax and olive oil and a little calendula. For hands that work. It's heavier than the other." The woman opened it and smelled it, and her expression went through a small and very human journey, assessment to recognition to something like relief, the relief of having found the right thing without having to search for it. She paid and tucked the tin into the fold of her wrap and moved on, and Amira watched her go with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has answered a question correctly, not the satisfaction of the sale, though the sale was welcome, but the satisfaction of the match. An old man came to the counter next, moving slowly, the deliberate, considered slowness of a man who has decided that speed is no longer something he owes anyone. He was dressed simply, his tunic worn soft with many washings. His hands, when he set them on the edge of the counter to steady himself, were remarkable, large and brown and marked by a lifetime of physical work. The skin at the knuckles thickened and cracked in the way that skin cracks when it is asked to do more than skin is designed to do. He looked at the counter without speaking. She waited. He looked at the bombs. He looked at Mishmish, who looked back at him with amber eyes. Something in the old man's expression shifted, not quite a smile, but the face's quiet acknowledgement that a thing was pleasing. "For the hands," he said finally. Amira reached into the basket's inner supply and produced a small tin she had packed specifically, thinking of exactly this kind of hand. Rendered tallow blended with beeswax and black seed oil, ingredients chosen for function rather than fragrance, because she had learned over the years that men who worked with their hands often preferred a preparation that did its work quietly, without scent. "For your hands, uncle," she said. "Twice a day, if you can. Before you sleep is the best time." He looked at the tin. He looked at her. "How much?" he asked. "Nothing," she said. "It is a gift. From the workshop. There is always one or two in the basket that are for giving." The old man took the tin. He held it in his cracked hands for a moment, this small thing she had given him, and he did not say thank you in words. He said it in the way that has no words, a small inclination of the head that carried more weight than words often did, the acknowledgement of someone who is not accustomed to receiving and is receiving something now and knows it, and knows also that no response he could make would be adequate to the moment, and so makes no response, only this small movement that says, I have received what you gave. I will not forget. He moved away into the market, slowly, the tin in his pocket. Layla had been watching from her place beside the basket. She said nothing, there was nothing to say, but she reached over and touched her mother's arm, briefly, and Amira felt the touch and understood it. The understanding that passed between them in that touch was the understanding of people who have worked together long enough that some things need no translation. This was right. This was the work. Not the vials and the alembic and the mortar, though those were part of it, but this. The tin in the old man's cracked pocket. The knowing of what someone needed before they had fully named it themselves. Later, as the market reached its busiest hour and the columns of light through the ceiling hole shifted toward their midday angle, Layla saw the young woman. She was standing a few stalls away, in the aisle, not quite at any counter, not quite looking at anything in particular, with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to someone who wants something and has not yet decided whether to want it enough to do anything about it. Young, perhaps 22 or 23, dressed neatly in a light-colored dress. She was looking at the display of oils at the nearest stall with an expression Layla recognized, the expression of someone for whom the price is not the obstacle but is nonetheless the obstacle. Layla watched her for a moment. Then she reached into her own basket and found what she had placed there that morning with exactly this kind of moment in mind, a small vial, sealed with a tiny cork, holding orange blossom water, not the oil, which was precious and concentrated, but the water, the hydrosol that came from the distillation process, the gentle byproduct of making the absolute. Fragrant and lovely and calming in a way entirely its own, not less than the oil but different from it, the oil's more accessible sister. She moved from behind the counter. She crossed the aisle and stood beside the young woman and said, quietly enough that it was only for her, "Excuse me." The young woman looked at her with the guarded expression of someone preparing for a sales approach. Layla held out the vial. "This is for you. A gift." The young woman looked at the vial. Looked at Layla. "I haven't bought anything," she said. "I know," Layla said. "It is not for buying. It is orange blossom water. For your rest, a few drops on your pillow, or on your wrists before you sleep. It is calming. It is a gift from the roses." The young woman looked at the vial for a moment longer. Then she took it. Her fingers closed around it carefully, the way you close your fingers around something small and valuable, not tightly, but with intention, the way you hold something you have just decided matters. "Thank you," she said. The words came out slightly unsteady, as if she had not expected to be moved by anything in the market today and was adjusting to the fact that she had been. Layla smiled at her and went back to the counter. She made no ceremony of it, simply returned to her place beside her mother and Mishmish, and the market moved on around them, and nothing marked the moment as different from any other moment in the Souq's busy midday. But Amira had seen. She always saw, in the way that mothers see the things their children do when they think they are not being observed, with a completeness and a love that does not announce itself, that requires no acknowledgement, that simply is, the way the fountain simply is. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say that the silence between them did not already hold. The midday call to prayer swept through the Souq, muffled by the thick stone and vaulted ceiling but somehow more insistent for it, as if the architecture had been designed to remind the commerce below that there were things larger than commerce. The market breathed differently for a moment, voices lowering, a slight slowing. Then the call ended, and the full noise resumed. By early afternoon, the market had given what it had to give. They gathered their baskets, lighter now, and exchanged the brief, comfortable words of ending with the neighboring sellers, the woman who sold dried herbs, the elderly man with his coal pots, the brief and easy language of people who share a space regularly and have developed, in that sharing, a familiarity that is not quite friendship but is more than mere proximity. Near the gate, they passed the coffee seller, an old man behind a small brazier from which the smell of cardamom-spiced coffee reached into the covered air with an authority that other smells in the Souq simply could not match. He held out 2 small cups as they passed, the way he always did. They stopped and took them. The coffee was very strong, very sweet, and deeply, completely itself in the way that only coffee made the same way for many years by the same hands can be. The cardamom was present in it not as a flavor so much as a quality, a warmth that the coffee carried, a depth that the cardamom gave it, in the same way that sandalwood gave depth to the morning's rose blend. They stood in the gateway and drank while the market moved around them, and the light at the end of the gate showed the street outside bright and hot and patient, and Mishmish peered over the rim of his basket at the old coffee seller with amber eyes that held all the unknowing wisdom of the very young. The old coffee seller looked at the kitten. The kitten looked at the old coffee seller. Something passed between them that neither could have named and that did not require naming. They moved out through the gate and into the bright street in the full heat of the Damascus afternoon, walking home through the old city's patient lanes. The baskets were lighter than when they had arrived, lighter in weight and in some other way too, the way you feel lighter after giving something away than you did before you gave it. Their steps were unhurried. The sound of the Souq faded behind them until it was only a warmth in the air, a presence more felt than heard, the city's midday heartbeat. They walked through the alleys the way they had come, the narrow stone corridors, the walls close on either side, the framed slices of sky above. But the city at this hour wore its afternoon face, which was different from its morning face, quieter in the streets, the serious business of the day having retreated behind closed doors and shuttered windows for the midday rest, the shade deeper now that the sun had moved to its highest point and the shadows had pooled in the narrow passages. Amira walked and thought about what had been given. Not calculated, she was not someone who tallied kindness, but simply present in her mind, the way the smells of the market were still present in the air of her clothing, the tin in the old man's pocket, the vial in the young woman's fingers, the warmth of the cup in the gate. Small things. The kind that would leave no record anywhere except in the people who had received them and the slight, imperceptible shift they produced in the quality of the world. She believed in this. Had always believed in it, even when she could not have put it into words. That the world was not altered by large acts alone. That small kindnesses had a cumulative weight, and that this weight, distributed across a city in a lifetime, was a real force in the world, not dramatic, not visible, but real. Above them, between the walls, The afternoon sky was a blue so deep it was almost violet. And in the basket on Layla's arm, Mishmish slept. Chapter 4. The Secret of the Damascus Rose. The afternoon light, when they returned from the Souq, was the color of honey. Not the pale, filtered honey of light market varieties, but the deep, specific honey of dark comb production from the mountain hives east of the city, almost amber, almost brown, a color that carried warmth not merely as a visual quality but as a felt one. It fell through the courtyard's open sky and settled on the pale stone with a weight that morning light had never possessed. Amira stood in the doorway and felt it on her face and did not hurry away from it. Behind her, Layla released Mishmish from his basket. He emerged with the dignity of someone who has tolerated a situation and is now ready to move past it, no complaint, simply the resumption of his independent self. He went to his water dish, drank with great composure, then attended to the cleaning of his left ear with a focus that suggested the ear had done something to deserve it during the market excursion. Layla came to stand beside her mother in the courtyard doorway. They both looked at the honey light on the pale stone, the fountain catching it, the jasmine on the far wall glowing in it. "The blend," Layla said. Not quite a question. A thought spoken aloud, the natural next thing, the way one part of a day leads to the next not because it must but because it wants to. "Yes," Amira said. "The blend." They moved into the workshop, where the afternoon light came through the back window at a lower, more horizontal angle, touching shelves the morning light had left in shadow and illuminating them with a richness that was different from the morning's clarity. The amber vials deepened toward garnet. The clear ones caught a warmth they had not shown before. Amira went to the high shelf where certain things were kept apart from the others. Not behind a door, this was not that kind of secret. But on a high shelf, separated from the everyday working materials by a small gap that was understood by both of them as a border between the ordinary production of the workshop and something else. She brought them down one by one. A small stoppered bottle of Rose Absolute, not the morning's distillate, but a preparation of a different kind, older, more concentrated, produced by a cold enfleurage method that took weeks and resulted in something so complex that Amira used it rarely and only in this one formulation. He considered this outcome. He batted it again. This time it curled slightly at one end as it settled, and this curl seemed to represent an escalation in the ribbon's interestingness, because Mishmish lowered himself to the floor in the posture of deep engagement, elbows on the stone, hindquarters slightly elevated, and batted it again with more conviction. Layla made a small sound that was not quite a laugh but carried all of its warmth. Amira watched him play and felt the afternoon in the blend before her, the rose and sandalwood and labdanum and honey paste and the particular quality of the Damascus light through the window and the ginger of the small animal on the floor and the slow certain turning of the day toward evening. "The secret, Layla," she said. Layla looked up from her notebook. "The secret is not the rose," Amira said. "The rose is the messenger. The secret is the patience. You cannot rush the scent. You cannot decide, before you have begun, what the blend will be, and then make it be that thing. You have to begin, and let what is there show you what it wants to become. The oil knows. It knows before you do. Your job is to listen to what the oil knows." "But you have made this blend many times," Layla said. "You know what it becomes." "I know what it has been," Amira said. But today's blend is not yesterday's blend. The rose absolute is not the same as last season's. The flowers that made it were grown in different weather, harvested on a different morning. The sandalwood is 15 years older than when I first opened the bottle. Every time I make this blend, everything in it is different. And so I have to listen every time. She stirred the bowl again, slowly. That is the patience. Not the willingness to wait. Anyone can wait. The patience is the willingness to listen. To stay open to what is actually there, rather than what you expected to find. Layla wrote something in her notebook. Mishmish had lost interest in the ribbon and was sitting beside it with the expression of a creature that has completed something to its own satisfaction. His tail moved slowly, a slight, rhythmic sweep. "Your grandmother," Amira said, "used to say that a good perfume was like a good life. That it had to change. That if it smelled the same at the end as at the beginning, something had been missed." She picked up the bowl and breathed it. A good perfume changes on the skin. The top notes go first, the bright ones, the ones that announce themselves. Then the middle comes forward, and you realize there was always more than the first impression suggested. And then, at the end, the base, the things that were there from the beginning but that waited. Those are the things that last. "The sandalwood," Layla said quietly. "The sandalwood," Amira agreed. "The labdanum. The honey. The things that don't announce themselves." And then Layla was already turning toward the small brass burner on the side table, had lit it quietly while Amira was speaking, the small piece of charcoal caught and glowing, a chip of agarwood no larger than a thumbnail placed at its center. The smoke was rising now. Silver. Slow. It moved in the still air with the particular movement of smoke in a closed room, not the purposeful movement of wind-carried things but the drifting, self-directed movement of something following its own interior logic, curling upward and sideways and turning back on itself in small unhurried spirals before rising again, each spiral slightly different from the last. The smell of agarwood smoke was something she could not simplify, dark and sweet and slightly earthy and warm and very old, present not just in the nose but somewhere deeper, in the quality of breath, as if breathing it changed the breath itself, made it slower and fuller and more deliberate. It was, she thought, the smell of the day ending well. Mishmish, sitting beside Layla's chair with his chin tilted up, was working his nose with concentrated attention that the smoke apparently deserved. Whether he found it pleasant or simply remarkable was impossible to say. His expression, as always, was one of complete seriousness applied to whatever was immediately in front of him. Then he sneezed. It was a very small sneeze. A miniature convulsion, ears flattening briefly, eyes closing, the small body entirely committed to the event for its brief duration. Then he was composed again, sitting straight, expression restored to its usual gravity, proceeding with his assessment of the smoke as if the sneeze had not occurred and he would prefer it not to be mentioned. Layla made the sound that was not quite a laugh but held its warmth entirely, and this time Amira made the same sound, and the two sounds joined in the workshop and rose with the smoke and mixed with the smell of rose absolute and sandalwood and agarwood in the late afternoon in Damascus and became part of what the room was, part of what the afternoon was, part of what the workshop would hold in its walls and its wood and its glass and its stone for a long time to come. They spoke of other things as the smoke rose. Of Amira's mother, who had made the tafe paste in this same room, at this same table, and who had had a way of humming while she worked, not a recognizable song, just a sustained note, low and steady, that meant she was satisfied with what she was doing. Amira had not thought of that hum in years, and then she thought of it now, in the smoke, in the afternoon, with Layla beside her, and it arrived with a completeness that surprised her, not just the sound of it remembered, but the feeling of it, the feeling of being a child in this room while her mother worked, the feeling of the room being a safe place. A place where important things happened that she did not yet fully understand but that she trusted completely because her mother was the one doing them. She told Layla about the hum. Layla listened and was quiet for a moment and then said, "You hum too. When you're finishing a blend and it's right. A very small sound. I don't think you know you do it." "I didn't know," Amira said. "It's the same note," Layla said. "Every time." Something passed through Amira at this, not sentiment, exactly, though it was close to sentiment, not grief, though it touched grief at one edge, something larger than any one feeling, something that had to do with what passes between people through time, what continues, what is carried forward not in the deliberate way of a lesson taught but in the unconscious way of a thing absorbed so thoroughly that it becomes part of how you are without your knowing. The hum that her mother had made had become the hum that she made, without her knowing she was making it. And perhaps Layla would make it too, one day, in some future workshop, without knowing where it came from. She looked at her daughter. Layla looked back at her with her mother's eyes, the dark attending eyes that noticed things and found them interesting, and in them Amira saw not just Layla but the whole depth of Layla, the accumulation of 30 years, the child and the young woman and the person she was now, layered together the way the base notes of a perfume were layered beneath the surface, present from the beginning, waiting to be there at the end. "The sandalwood," Amira said again, very quietly. Layla smiled. The smoke continued to rise, slow and silver, carrying the worries of the day upward and away through the warm air of the workshop, up past the glowing vials and the copper alembic in the shelves full of captured time and into the sky where the afternoon was darkening by degrees toward evening. And in the ceramic bowl on the table between them, the secret blend of the Damascus rose settled into itself, patient and complete, smelling of everything it was made of and of something else besides, something that had no name except the name of the place that had made it and the hands that had made it in the afternoon in which it had been made. Chapter 5. The Night of Stillness. Evening came to Damascus the way the best things came to Damascus, unhurriedly, without announcement, simply present when you looked up and noticed it had arrived. The honey gold of the afternoon light deepened through amber and into something richer, a color the old stones seemed to absorb and then give back transformed, warmer than it had received. The shadows lost their edges, their definition softening until shadow and lit stone existed in a conversation rather than a contrast. The market sounds had been withdrawing since mid-afternoon, and by early evening they were barely audible. In their place came the sounds of a neighborhood settling, more domestic and individual now, the sound of a specific door rather than the general sound of doors. Swallows appeared, filling the strip of sky above the courtyard walls with their quick, angular shapes, their high brief calls, and then they were gone, and then another group appeared and was gone too, writing their quick signatures across the deepening sky. Inside the house, the workshop's work was finished. The secret blend had been sealed in its ceramic vessel and returned to the high shelf, the materials cleaned and put away, the work table cleared. Everything was in its place. Mishmish had claimed the workshop's warm hearthstone, a wide, flat piece of pale limestone that retained the warmth of the day's fire long after the fire itself had gone cold. He was curled in a tight circle, his tail over his nose, his breathing barely visible, the steadiest sound in the room. In the kitchen, Amira was making the evening meal. Something simple, lentil soup with cumin and lemon, a dish of labna with good olive oil and dried mint, bread from the bakery they had passed that morning. The smell of the cumin as it met the hot oil in the pot, warm, slightly smoky, deeply savory, a smell so immediate and grounding that it seemed to return you to the fundamental fact of a kitchen, a stove, food being made, evening arriving. Layla sat at the kitchen table and watched her mother cook. She did this often, watched rather than helped, because Amira made the evening meal better alone, in her own rhythm, and watching something done well was its own form of participation. Mishmish appeared in the kitchen doorway, moved to his water dish with purposeful nonchalance, drank with great composure, investigated the smell near the stove, and then came to sit below Layla's chair and look up at her with the expression of someone who has not made a request but is simply making themselves available should one occur to anyone. She lifted him into her lap. He accepted this with dignity, settling, his chin lowered. And then a sound began, very quiet, barely audible over the soup and Amira's movements. A vibration more than a sound. A low, continuous, rhythmic resonance that seemed to come from inside him and fill the space of Layla's lap and move through her hands and into her arms and settle somewhere in her chest. Purring. Mishmish was purring. It was the first time he had done this, the first time the warmth and the safety and the food and the people and the day had accumulated into something sufficient to produce this small extraordinary vibration, this declaration from the interior of a very small animal that things were, on the whole, good. Amira heard it from the stove. She turned and looked at Layla and at the small ginger shape in Layla's lap and at the expression on Layla's face. The expression of someone who is holding something warm that is making a sound that makes it difficult to feel anything other than what that sound makes you feel. She smiled and turned back to the soup. The meal was eaten at the low table in the main room, slowly. The soup was good. The labna was good. The bread was the kind of bread that made other bread seem like it had not been trying. They ate and talked, the easy talk of people who have spent a full day together and moved through the more demanding conversations and arrived now at the gentler ones, the observations and memories and small things noticed but not yet shared. Layla had seen at the market a woman whose way of carrying herself had reminded her of someone she could not quite place, and this had been sitting at the back of her mind all afternoon. She mentioned it now, and they spent some pleasant time moving through the roster of acquaintances and relatives and neighbors with the purposeless enjoyment of a conversation that has no destination and does not need one. Amira remembered something the old coffee seller at the gate had said, not today, but some months ago, on a quiet morning when she had helped him carry his small brazier from the storage room to his corner. In those few minutes of ordinary assistance, he had told her something about his village of origin, about the particular quality of the coffee his mother had made, a detail so specific and so small that she had carried it with her without knowing why, and it was now, in the evening, offering itself to her as a thing worth sharing. She shared it. Layla listened. The lamp on the shelf cast its soft and slightly dancing light across the room, and Mishmish on his warm cushion made his small steady sound, and outside the house the city was settling into the particular quiet of the Damascus night. The dishes were cleared. The table was wiped. The kitchen was set in order for the morning. Layla made tea, mint again, the same as the morning, but the evening mint was different, carrying a gentleness that the morning version did not quite have. Some quality that the end of the day gave to it, as if the mint too had moved through its own day and arrived somewhere more settled. They carried the tea to the courtyard. It was cooler now. The stone had given back the warmth it had absorbed through the day. The jasmine on the far wall had gone through its full transformation. The buds barely open in the early morning were now fully open, each blossom at the peak of its expression, and the scent in the cooler evening air was different from what it had been in the morning, fuller and more present, with a depth that the warmth of the day released and the cool of the evening held. The fountain dripped. It had been dripping all day, through the morning in the workshop hours and the market in the afternoon and the evening meal, and it would drip through the night and would be dripping when they woke in the morning, this unchanging constant, this small and steady voice that anchored the house in its own particular sound. The night sky above the courtyard was deeply, completely clear. The stars were present in a way the daytime sky concealed, the courtyard's four walls framing a rectangle of them, a particular and bounded arrangement of light. Layla had brought Mishmish. She had not planned to, simply picked him up from his cushion as she passed, and he had come without protest. Now he was in her lap on the bench, the purring resumed, a small warm weight in the cooler air. They sat without speaking. This was not new. They had been sitting without speaking in this courtyard since Layla was a child, learning without being taught that silence between people who are comfortable with each other is not an absence but a presence, not a failure of conversation but a form of it. But this silence had a quality of its own. It was the silence of a completed day. A day that had moved through itself, through the dawn and the courtyard and the kitten on the doorstep and the workshop and the market and the acts of giving in the afternoon light and the secret blend and the silver smoke and the evening meal, and had arrived here, at this bench, at this fountain, at this sky, having done what it came to do. Amira breathed it in. "Listen," she said. Not a command. A word offered to the silence as a kind of door, an invitation to attend to what was already there. Layla closed her eyes. The fountain dripped. Beyond the courtyard walls, very far away, the city continued its nighttime existence, a dog making its nightly commentary on something, the very faint sound of a cart on the cobblestones, a voice, indistinct, brief, gone. And beneath all of these, the thing Amira had been listening for, the sound that the old city made when you listened carefully enough, when you had been quiet long enough and patient enough. The sound of the city breathing. Not a metaphor, or not only. The accumulated sound of all the stone and all the water and all the air moving through all the alleys and courtyards and rooms of this ancient place, a sound too low to be a sound and too present to be nothing, the frequency of old places that have been inhabited so long and so continuously that they have developed something like a pulse. Damascus breathed. Layla opened her eyes, slowly, the way eyes open when the interior world is worth staying in for another moment. She looked at the stars, at the fountain, at her mother beside her, her silver hair, her ivory silk, the particular quality of her stillness, which was not the stillness of someone who has stopped moving but the stillness of someone who is fully arrived, entirely where they are. "There is peace in stillness," Amira said, her voice very quiet. "Not the absence of difficulty," she continued, after a moment. "Not the absence of things that need doing, or thinking about, or carrying. She paused, watching the fountain. The peace that is there anyway. Inside the difficulty. Underneath it. Mishmish shifted in Layla's lap, resettling without waking fully. The purring did not stop. He found it in one day, Layla said. Amira understood. He did not have to look for it. He accepted what was offered. The milk. The wool. The warm stone. He received it. She paused. That is the other thing about patience. Not just the patience to work slowly. The patience to receive. To let what is good simply be good, without making it complicated. The stars were very steady. Amira had always noted this about stars from this courtyard, how utterly untroubled they were by the lives being lived below them, their steadiness saying, all of this is smaller than it seems when you are inside it. All of this has been happening for a long time. All of this will continue. She found this comforting. She did not need the stars to care about her life. She needed them to be steady, and they were. Mishmish was deeply asleep now, past the light sleep of the early evening, past the shallow dozing of the hearthstone hours, into the real and total sleep of a small animal that has had a very full first day and has finally arrived at the end of it. His breathing was the only indication that he was alive, a tiny rhythm, so small and so regular that it was barely distinguishable from the silence around it. The house breathed around them. The fountain dripped. The jasmine held its perfume in the cooling air. Amira felt the weight of the day on her shoulders, not as burden, not as fatigue, but as the pleasant, substantive weight of something lived through fully, something inhabited to its edges, something that had asked things of her and to which she had responded with the full measure of what she had. A good weight. The weight of a life being used well. She thought, as she often thought in these evening hours, about what endured. Not abstractly, she was not a person given to extended abstraction, but immediately and specifically, prompted by the particular evening and the particular smell of jasmine and the particular small animal sleeping in her daughter's lap. What stayed? What lasted? What a day or a life left behind that continued to exist when the immediate experience of it was over. The fragrances were part of the answer. The little vial of orange blossom water that Layla had given to the young woman in the market would carry something into that woman's life, not just the scent, but the feeling of it, the unexpected gift of it, the moment of being seen and attended to without being asked to justify the attending. The bomb in the old man's cracked pocket would carry in it something of the hands that had made it and the hands that had given it. These things persisted. Not loudly. Not in ways that could be seen. But they persisted. She looked at Layla. Layla had returned from wherever she had been, was present again, looking at the stars but with the quality of presence rather than distance, here rather than away. Yes, Amira said. I think so too. Why? The materials were the same as always. Because you were there, she said. You have always been in the room for the blending. But today you were in the work. There is a difference. Layla was quiet. Then her hand moved, briefly, to her mother's hand on the bench between them, a touch, a press, and then her hand returned to Mishmish in his small sleeping warmth. The night held them. The courtyard held them. The stone walls of the house held them, walls that had held many lives before theirs and would hold many after, patient in the way that stone is patient, which is to say absolutely and without condition. Amira closed her eyes. She breathed in the jasmine and the cool air and the very faint trace of the day's agarwood smoke that still lived in the fabric of her clothes, and she let the day move through her one more time, not reviewing it, not assessing it, just letting it be present one last time before sleep came and carried it into the deeper past where completed days rested. The morning's fountain and the morning star. Mishmish on the doorstep with his amber eyes. The workshop glowing with the morning light through colored glass. The thump of the mortar and the hiss of the alembic. The market with its columns of dusty light. The old man's cracked hands. The young woman's fingers closing around the vial. The honey light of the afternoon. The secret materials on the table. The sandalwood beneath the rose. The silver smoke rising. The hum she had not known she made. The sneeze. The lamp. The fountain. Always the fountain. She thought of the word her mother had used, once, to describe what they did. Not perfumery, not trade, not craft, though it was all of those things. Her mother had called it tending. We tend the sense, she had said. The way you tend a garden. The way you tend a fire. Not by controlling, but by attending. By being present and responsive and patient. By giving what is needed when it is needed, and standing back when standing back is what is needed. Tending. That was the word. And on this night, in this courtyard, with the fountain dripping and the jasmine breathing and the small animal asleep in her daughter's lap and the stars above them steady and countless and entirely untroubled, Amira felt, with a completeness and a simplicity that required no refinement, that she had tended well. The day had been a good day. And now it was resting. And so were they. Chapter 6. The lasting fragrance. Seasons passed gently over the house with the blue-painted door. Not quickly. Time in the old city moved with a deliberateness, a weight, a consciousness of its own passage that came from having been in passage for so very long. The seasons arrived and departed the way visitors arrived in a house where visitors were welcomed properly, announced, received, attended to, and seen off with acknowledgement of what they had brought. Summer deepened and then relented. The jasmine completed its flowering and rested, its energy held for the next spring's effort. The courtyard light gave way to the softer, more contemplative gold of autumn, less direct, with a tendency to arrive at low angles and lie long across the pale stone, producing shadows of a gentleness that summer's more vertical light had not permitted. The air changed. The smell of Damascus in autumn was different from the smell of Damascus in summer in ways Amira had spent years trying to describe and never quite managed to, because the difference was not in any one element but in the relationship between elements, the way the air carried them and combined them and presented them to the nose at a slightly different angle, with a slightly different weight. The first morning that she stepped into the courtyard and smelled autumn, really smelled it, the particular coalescence of dry stone and cooler water and the changed smell of jasmine leaves now that the blossoms were gone, she stood for a long moment and breathed it in with the full attention she gave to things she loved. She had lived through 55 autumns. Each one had smelled like this, and like no other thing, and like itself alone. In the cooler months, Layla had found a new absorption, the historical records. Not the daily notebooks, which she herself had been maintaining, but the older records, the ones going back through Amira's years of work and before, into the records Amira's mother had kept, and before that, the fragmentary notes Amira's grandmother had made in a hand so small and spidery that reading them required a patient squinting. Layla had developed, over weeks, into something like a skill. These records were extraordinary. They held the accumulated knowledge of 3 generations of women working in this room with these materials, each generation adding to what the previous one had left, not overriding but layering, as the vials on the shelves layered, as the years layered in the smell of the room itself, each one present in what came after it, none of them gone. Layla read them slowly, in the evenings, by the light of the oil lamp, while Amira sat nearby with her own work or her own thoughts. She read them the way she had learned to smell the blends, not rushing toward the conclusion, not trying to extract the useful parts and discard the rest, but moving through them with full attention, receiving what they offered in the order in which it was offered. She found things she had not expected to find. Recipes, yes, the expected contents of such records. But also observations, notes on what a particular material smelled like in a particular season, how it behaved in heat versus cold, what it combined with well and what it resisted. Notes on people, customers, in some cases, small compressed histories of encounters that had left enough impression on the maker to be recorded. And in the oldest records, in the grandmother's spidery hand, passages that read less like records of practice and more like reflections on it, observations about the nature of the work itself, about what scent was and what it carried. One of these she copied into her own notebook and showed to Amira one evening. Amira read it. Her grandmother's words, in her grandmother's hand. She had seen this passage before, many years ago, when she had first gone through these records as a young woman. She had not thought of it in some time, and reading it now, in the lamp's light, with the autumn air moving through the courtyard and mishmash on the hearthstone and 30 years of her own work behind her, it arrived differently than it had arrived then. It said, in the small spidery script, "The fragrance will fade from the cloth, but the memory of what you felt when you first smelled it will not fade. We do not sell scent. We give people a place to return to." Amira held the notebook for a moment without speaking. Then she said, "She was right." And Layla said, "She was always right." And they sat in the comfortable certainty of people who know that the women who came before them were, on the essential things, right, and that this is not a limitation but a gift, a solid ground to stand on while you find what is yours to add. Mishmish had grown. He had grown in the way that young cats grow, quickly and then quickly again, until at some point in the middle of autumn Layla noticed she could no longer hold him in one cupped hand the way she had on his first day. But he had grown in other ways too. He had grown into the house, into its rhythms and routines. He knew the hearthstone and the wool cloth and the courtyard bench and the warm corner behind the kitchen stove. He knew the sound of the front door opening and what it meant. And he knew, above all, the 2 women, completely, specifically, in the particular detail of their individual sounds and smells and habits. He knew which footsteps were Amira's and which were Layla's before they entered any room. Winter came. Damascus in winter was a revelation, cooler, wetter, the stone darkened by rain, the courtyards full of the sound of rain falling into fountains that were already dripping, the rain adding its own rhythm to the fountain's rhythm. The jasmine, bare of blossoms but not of leaves, dripped on the gray winter mornings. The workshop was warm, the small fire in the corner brazier doing only the work of warmth, the vials on the shelves catching the firelight and throwing it back in smaller, more flickering constellations, the colors moving and changing with each movement of the flame. People spoke of the house. This had always been true. But there was a quality to the speaking now that was different, as if the workshop and the women in it had arrived at some threshold of reputation that changed the nature of the speaking. Not grand speaking. Not the speaking of fame, which Amira had always found faintly absurd when attached to things that were genuinely small and genuinely good. It was quieter than that, and more durable. It was the speaking of people who had received something and wanted to describe what they had received. The woman whose mother's hands had been healed by the bomb, she had told 3 people, each of whom had found their way to the market counter. The old man with the cracked hands told no one, as far as anyone could tell, but he came himself every month, quietly chose the same preparation, and left, and came back. The young woman with the orange blossom water had mentioned it to a friend, and the friend had come to the counter and said, with a slight uncertainty, "I was told that if I came here, someone would know what I needed." Layla had known. She had looked at the woman, who was tired, specifically tired in the way of someone who has been carrying something for a long time and has not been putting it down at night the way you need to put things down at night, and chosen for her a blend with vetiver and neroli in the very small trace of frankincense, a blend with a quality she could only describe as grounding, as if it reminded the body of its own weight, returned the wandering attention to the fact of a body that needed rest and was worth resting. The woman had come back the following week. She had said, "I slept." And the way she said it, with the gravity of someone for whom sleep had not been available and was now, unexpectedly, returned, was enough. Layla had told Amira that evening. Amira had been quiet for a moment. Then she said, "This is what your grandmother meant. A place to return to." The shop became known not as a place to buy a particular thing but as a place where a particular attention was available. People came who were not certain what they were looking for. People came who thought they were looking for a gift and discovered they were looking for something for themselves. Some of them, arriving for the first time, were surprised by what they found. They had expected something grander, more theatrical, a more elaborate demonstration of expertise. What they found instead was 2 women in a basket and, for those who came at the right hour, a ginger cat asleep in the lined basket on the counter with the amber weight of his sleep pressing the cloth flat around him. What they found was not grandeur. What they found was care. And care, it turned out, was what they had come for, without knowing that was what they had come for. Spring returned. The jasmine came back with the insistence of things that have rested deeply and are now ready. It began as the smallest suggestion, a thickening at the growing tips, a quality of urgency in the green, a sense that it knew something the rest of the courtyard did not yet know. Then, over days, the buds, tiny, tight, pale at their tips, appearing in such numbers along the cascade of vine that the wall seemed to have changed texture overnight. Then, on one particular morning, the first blossom. Amira saw it when she came to the courtyard in the early light, her ivory silk, her saffron shawl, her hair twisted at the back of her neck. She crossed to the bench beneath the jasmine wall and sat, as she always sat, and looked up, and there it was, one small white star among the buds, fully open, its 5 petals perfectly arranged, its center a point of deeper color. She breathed. It was there. The jasmine. The promise kept, the cycle continued. the same smell she had been receiving in this courtyard for 30 years, arriving now for the 31st time with the quality of something that does not diminish with repetition but accumulates, each spring's jasmine carrying in it all the springs before it, the smell richer for its history, deeper for its returning. This was what the fragrances did, she thought. This was what all the careful work in the workshop was in service of, the way a smell could carry time. The way breathing the jasmine in the morning was not just smelling the jasmine but receiving all the other mornings she had smelled it, layered beneath this one, each adding its particular quality of light and season and life. The nose remembered in a way the mind did not, suddenly, completely, without warning, triggered by a match to a pattern laid down so long ago that the conscious mind had no record of it. You smelled something and were, for a moment, entirely somewhere else, real, specific, made of a particular light and a particular time and a particular person's presence, and then the moment passed and you were here again. She was here. In her courtyard. In her city. In her morning. The fountain dripped. Layla came and sat beside her, and they shared the morning the way they had shared the first morning of the story, in the same way, at the same bench, with the same unhurried quality of two people who are exactly where they mean to be. Mishmish, now fully grown but still with the ginger warmth of his coloring, appeared in the courtyard doorway. He regarded the courtyard with the comprehensive gaze of ownership, for he did own it, in the way a creature owns a place, not legally but actually, in the fact of having chosen it and remained and made it his own. He crossed to the fountain and looked into the basin with the thoughtfulness he brought to it every morning, this daily confrontation with the water that seemed to offer him something, not the water itself, but the looking. Then he came to the bench and jumped up between them and turned his circle and settled, his purring beginning before he had quite finished settling, the sound arriving like something that had been waiting for him to stop moving so it could start. Late one autumn evening, in a year that had been full in the way the good years were full, not of exceptional events but of ordinary days attended to completely, Amira and Layla sat in the courtyard. The jasmine had finished its second flowering and was resting. The air was cool enough for the saffron shawl to feel necessary. The stars above the courtyard walls were appearing, one by one, in the deepening sky. Mishmish was between them on the bench, a substantial presence now, his ginger fur denser in the autumn, his amber eyes carrying the settled authority of a creature that has been somewhere long enough to belong there entirely. He was purring, as he often purred in the evenings, a sound that had become as much a part of this courtyard as the fountains dripping. Amira thought of something she had not thought of in some years, a moment very early in her time with the workshop, when she was young and still finding her way through the complexity of the work and had felt, one particular afternoon, an acute fear, that she was not enough, that she did not know enough, that the thing she was trying to do required capacity she was not sure she possessed. She had gone to her mother. And her mother had said, not unkindly, not dismissively, but with the directness of someone who knows that the truth, delivered clearly, is more helpful than consolation, she had said, the work will teach you what you need to know, if you let it. Stay with it. Be patient with yourself the way you are patient with the blend. You cannot rush the learning any more than you can rush the scent. She thought of this now and smiled at the courtyard in the dark, a private smile, the kind offered to a memory rather than a person. How long ago that afternoon seemed. How small the fear that had felt so large. And how much the work had given her, in the years that followed, simply by being allowed to do what her mother had said it would do. "What are you smiling at?" Layla asked. "Your grandmother," Amira said. Layla was quiet for a moment. "Then, I think about her too. When I'm in the workshop, I think she was in this room. She stood at this table. She breathed this same smell." "She did," Amira said. "And her mother before her. And her mother's mother. They sat with this, the depth of it, the vertical depth of it, the generations of women in the same room at the same table with the same materials and the same patience and the same willingness to listen to what the oil knew, and neither of them felt the need to do anything with it, to make it into a statement or a conclusion. It was simply true, and true was enough. It had always been enough. It would go on being enough. The stars above the courtyard were fully present, the dark complete and luminous, lit from within by the accumulated light of very old and very distant things. And the air of the courtyard, in the autumn night, carried what it always carried, the cool of the stone, the faint trace of the workshop's work, the memory of the agarwood smoke, and beneath all of it, quiet and persistent and entirely itself, the smell of the jasmine, not the blossoms, which were resting, but the plant itself, the green and living presence of it on the old stone wall, the smell of something rooted and enduring and content to wait for its next flowering. This was the fragrance that lasted. Not the concentrated essence in the vials, though those lasted in their way. But this, the smell of the place itself, of the accumulated life of a place that had been lived in with attention and with care, the smell of stone and water and growing things and work well done and meals eaten and conversations had and silences shared and small creatures received from doorsteps and seasons weathered and days given fully to the life that asked for them. The smell of a home. Which was, Amira thought, which had always been, beneath all the chemistry and all the craft and all the careful patience of the distillation, what she was trying to make. Not a product. A place to return to. She breathed in, slowly, the way she had breathed the jasmine on the first morning of the story and every morning since. Beside her, Layla breathed too. Between them, Mishmish purred. In the fountain, in the center of the courtyard, in the center of the house, in the center of the old city that had been breathing for longer than memory, dripped its small and endless music into the dark. Drip. 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 And now, as the story rests and the city quiets and the stars above Damascus hold their steady ancient light, let this be the place you return to, when the world feels heavy and the night is long. The house with the blue-painted door. The courtyard where the fountain speaks and the jasmine remembers. The workshop glowing with the light of 100 colored vials. The two women who tended, with patience and with love, the fragrant things. The small ginger cat who found a doorstep and decided it was home. These things are here for you, whenever you need them. They are not going anywhere. Some things do not disappear. They linger. Softly. Endlessly. And as the night deepens around you, and your breath slows, and the weight of your body settles into whatever is holding you, let the scent of Damascus find you. Let it carry you down into the good dark. Let it remind you, as all the best fragrances remind us, of the thing beneath the fragrance. The thing that does not fade. Rest now. You are home.